The Forbidden Rescue. The night sky above Phyrexia burned with the scars of war. Smoke and fire filled the air, turning the once beautiful city into ruins. In the distance, the sound of explosions echoed, followed by the sharp hum of enemy patrol drones. Captain Daniel Carter moved carefully through the wreckage, his body low as he scanned his surroundings. His mission was clear: infiltrate the enemy stronghold, gather intelligence, and leave without being seen. It was supposed to be a simple stealth operation, but things had gone terribly wrong. Now he was trapped deep inside enemy territory, with no backup and no way out. As Daniel moved past a broken wall, he heard something. A faint sound. A breath. He froze, his hand tightening around his weapon. Someone was hiding in the shadows. Slowly, he turned his head and saw her. A woman, barely able to stand, leaned against the remains of a shattered pillar. Her long silver hair was stained with blood, her dark blue skin covered in dirt and bruises. She was wearing what looked like royal armor, but it was broken and scorched from battle. Her eyes met his, golden, wide, and full of shock. Daniel felt his heart pound. This was no ordinary soldier. The realization hit him instantly. She was a Phyrexian, and not just any Phyrexian. She was Princess Xyra, heir to the enemy throne. For a moment, time stood still. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Then, Xyra's breathing grew uneven. She was hurt, badly. Despite the fear in her eyes, she didn't beg for mercy. Instead, she clenched her jaw and tried to push herself up, though her body trembled from exhaustion. Daniel knew what he had to do. His orders were clear: eliminate any enemy on sight. But something made him hesitate. She was defenseless, weak, no threat to him. Killing an injured enemy felt wrong. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered his thoughts. Enemy soldiers. Daniel quickly ducked behind a collapsed wall, dragging Xyra with him. She let out a small gasp, but he covered her mouth before she could make a sound. Through the cracks in the broken wall, he saw them, 4 Phyrexian warriors, fully armed and searching the area. His grip on his weapon tightened. If they found him, it was over. One of the soldiers spoke in a deep, commanding voice. The princess must be here somewhere. She couldn't have gotten far. Daniel's eyes flickered to Xyra. They were hunting her. She swallowed hard, her golden eyes filled with something he didn't expect. Fear. Daniel had always thought of the Phyrexians as merciless warriors, cold and unfeeling. But now, looking at her, he saw something different. She was afraid, just like any human would be. The voices outside grew louder. If she's still alive, the High General wants her executed immediately. Xyra's body tensed, and Daniel felt her shudder against his grip. He realized something shocking. Her own people wanted her dead. She wasn't his enemy. She was just a survivor, like him. A decision burned in his mind. He could leave her here and complete his mission. She wasn't his responsibility. Saving her could put his own life in danger. But then he looked into her eyes again. She was alone, desperate, abandoned by the people she once called her own. Without thinking, Daniel whispered, "Stay quiet. Follow my lead." Xyra's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded weakly. The enemy soldiers moved closer. Daniel had only seconds to act. He grabbed Xyra's arm and pulled her toward a dark alley, staying low as they moved through the ruins. Every step was a risk. One wrong move, and they were dead. Behind them, the soldiers continued their search, but the noise of battle in the distance covered their escape. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel found an abandoned bunker and slipped inside. He locked the door behind them and finally let out a breath. They were safe. For now. Xyra slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. She looked up at him with an unreadable expression. Disbelief, confusion, even gratitude. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Why did you save me?" Daniel stared at her for a long moment. He didn't know the answer himself. But deep inside, he knew one thing. She was no longer just an enemy. And that changed everything. The unexpected alliance. The air inside the bunker was cold and damp. The faint glow from the ruined city outside barely reached the cracks in the steel walls. Daniel Carter stood near the door, listening for any sign of pursuit. His fingers rested on the trigger of his rifle, muscles tense, ready to fight if necessary. But for now, the night was silent. Behind him, Princess Xyra sat against the wall, her breathing uneven. She still looked shocked, not just from her wounds, but from the fact that a human had saved her life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the bunker was the faint hum of distant battles and the occasional crackling of fire outside. Then Xyra broke the silence. "You should have left me." Her voice was weak, but there was an edge to it, a mix of confusion and frustration. Daniel turned, his sharp blue eyes studying her carefully. He had heard many things about the Phyrexians, ruthless warriors, emotionless killers, sworn enemies of humanity. But the woman in front of him, she looked anything but ruthless. She looked lost. "I don't leave people to die," Daniel said simply. Xyra scoffed, though the movement made her wince in pain. "Spare me your human morality," she muttered. Daniel ignored her words. Instead, he crouched down beside her, pulling out a small medical kit from his tactical belt. "You're hurt," he said, examining the deep gash on her arm. Blood, dark purple instead of red, was smeared across her torn armor. Xyra tensed as he reached for her wound. "I don't need your help," she said, trying to pull away. Daniel grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. "Sit still. You'll bleed out if I don't treat this." She hesitated, then exhaled sharply, allowing him to work. As Daniel applied disinfectant, she flinched but made no sound. He was impressed by her resilience. Most soldiers would have screamed from the sting. "Why are your own people hunting you?" he asked, breaking the silence. Xyra stiffened. Her golden eyes darkened as she turned away. "I was betrayed," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel glanced up. He had expected her to lie, or refuse to answer, but there was something in her tone, a deep, hidden sorrow. "By who?" he pressed. Xyra closed her eyes. "My brother." Daniel frowned. "Your own family." She let out a bitter laugh. "You wouldn't understand, human. Power is everything among my kind. My brother saw me as a threat, so he did what he had to do." Daniel finished wrapping her wound, then sat back on his heels. "And what about you? What did you do to make him turn against you?" Xyra's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I tried to stop the war." That caught Daniel off guard. "You? What?" Xyra let out a slow breath. "This war between our species, it was never about survival. It was about dominance. My father wanted power, and my brother wanted his throne. I wanted peace. That made me a traitor in their eyes." Daniel studied her carefully. Could she be telling the truth? For years, humans had fought against the Phyrexians, believing them to be conquerors with no interest in diplomacy. But now, sitting in front of him was a Phyrexian princess, one who claimed she had tried to stop the war. "Why should I believe you?" he asked. Xyra turned her gaze toward him, her golden eyes locking onto his. "You shouldn't," she admitted. "But you already made your choice when you saved me." Daniel didn't respond. She wasn't wrong. He had risked everything to keep her alive. But why? His mission was already compromised. His superiors would never approve of this. If they found out, he could be executed for treason. And yet, something about Xyra made him hesitate. She wasn't just another enemy. She was someone who had been cast aside by her own people, just like him. He pushed the thought away. There was no time for doubts. He stood up and walked toward the door, checking the small communication device on his wrist. "I need to contact my team," he said. Xyra's head snapped up. "No." Daniel frowned. "Excuse me. If your people know you're with me, they'll come for you. Xyra said. "And when they do, they'll kill me." Daniel clenched his jaw. She had a point. There was only one option left. They had to get off this planet. Together. But before he could say anything, a sudden noise cut through the silence. The sharp, high-pitched beep of a tracking device. Daniel's eyes widened. It wasn't his. Xyra paled. And then, from outside, a mechanical voice echoed through the ruins. "Princess Xyra DT. Elimination team deployed." Daniel's stomach dropped. Run. Now. A bond beyond war. The moment the mechanical voice rang out, Daniel's instincts kicked in. "Move. Now," he barked, grabbing Xyra's arm and pulling her to her feet. Xyra staggered, her body still weak from her wounds, but there was no time to hesitate. Death was coming. Daniel shoved his rifle onto his back, looping his arm under Xyra's to support her weight. His mind was already calculating their next move. They had two options, fight or flee. Fighting meant certain death. Fleeing was the only chance. Outside, the ground trembled with the approach of Phyrexian shock troopers. Their armored boots pounded against the cracked pavement, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Daniel clenched his jaw. They were outnumbered. They had no backup, no allies, just the two of them. But he had survived worse. With a sharp breath, he hauled Xyra forward, forcing her to run. The chase begins. They burst through the bunker's side door and into the ruined city. Smoke and fire filled the air, the wreckage of fallen buildings casting eerie shadows under the flickering glow of neon signs. Xyra stumbled, her breath ragged. Where are we going?" she gasped. "Anywhere but here, Princess." Daniel pulled her into a narrow alley, just as a barrage of plasma rounds exploded behind them. The enemy had spotted them. Daniel grabbed his rifle and fired back, his shot striking one of the drones hovering overhead. It sparked violently before crashing into the rubble below. But there were more coming. A deep mechanical voice boomed through the streets. "Tar GT's LOCATE. Execution imminent." Xyra's face paled. "They've sent sentinels." Daniel's stomach tightened. Sentinels. Phyrexia's deadliest enforcers. Machines programmed to hunt and kill without hesitation. He glanced at Xyra, noting the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just afraid of dying. She was afraid of them. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "How fast can you run?" Xyra straightened, inhaling sharply. "Fast enough." "Good." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "Because we're not stopping." The escape through the Undercity. Daniel led Xyra through the maze of ruined streets, dodging falling debris as sentinels rained down fire from above. Their escape route was shrinking by the second. Then, a break. Ahead, a cracked sewer grate lay partially open, leading into the tunnels beneath the city. Daniel didn't think twice. He grabbed Xyra's arm and shoved her inside first, following right after. The tunnel was dark, damp, and smelled of rust and decay. The air was thick with the weight of history. This place had once been part of an ancient Phyrexian city, long abandoned before the war. Xyra caught her breath. "They won't follow us down here." Daniel arched a brow. "Why not?" Her expression darkened. "Because this place is cursed." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Great, just what I needed." Despite the danger above, the tunnels gave them a moment to think. Daniel pulled out a small flashlight from his gear and flicked it on. The dim glow revealed crumbling stone walls, old murals covered in dust, and strange symbols carved into the rock. "Where exactly are we?" Daniel muttered. Xyra hesitated before answering. "This was once the city of the forgotten. It belonged to my ancestors before the Empire rose." Daniel scanned the markings on the walls. Some depicted humanoids and Phyrexians standing side by side. Others showed wars, betrayals, and something far darker. Xyra's voice softened. "Before the war, there was peace between our species. Before my father. Before my brother. Daniel studied her. You really believe in peace, don't you? She met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with something raw and unguarded. I do. Daniel exhaled. For years, he had fought against her people, lost friends, seen planets burn. He had never thought peace was possible. But now, maybe, just maybe. Before he could say anything, a deep metallic growl echoed through the tunnel. Both of them froze. Xyra's face went pale. It followed us. Daniel turned, his flashlight beam catching the hulking silhouette of a sentinel crawling through the tunnel behind them. It wasn't just hunting them. It was playing with them. Daniel cursed under his breath. They had to move. Now. Run, he shouted, grabbing Xyra's hand and pulling her forward. The chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The Great Escape. The tunnels trembled as the sentinel's growl echoed through the ancient passageways. Its glowing red eyes cut through the darkness like twin stars of death. The heavy clank of its metallic limbs, scraping against the stone, sent a chill through Xyra's spine. Daniel barely had time to think. Move. Now, he barked, gripping Xyra's hand and pulling her forward. She stumbled, but he kept her steady. They raced through the underground ruins, their boots pounding against the damp stone floor. The tunnels twisted and turned, endless and suffocating, the stale air thick with dust. Behind them, the sentinel charged forward like a beast unchained. It wasn't just chasing them, it was hunting them. Daniel stole a quick glance back. The sentinel was massive, 8 feet tall, with an exoskeletal frame reinforced by pulsating energy shields. Its body was part metal, part synthetic flesh, and its 4 razor-sharp limbs clawed into the walls as it gained speed. Xyra's breath came in sharp gasps. We can't outrun it. Daniel's jaw clenched. She was right. The thing was faster, stronger, and relentless. They needed a way out. Fast. The trapped passageway. Ahead, the tunnel suddenly split in 2 directions. The left path sloped downward into darkness, while the right path had a faint light at the end. Daniel didn't hesitate. He yanked Xyra toward the right. Just as they reached the end of the tunnel, the ground shook violently. Then, disaster. A huge slab of stone crumbled from the ceiling, blocking the exit. They were trapped. Daniel spun around just in time to see the sentinel launch itself toward them. Thinking fast, Daniel shoved Xyra behind him, raising his rifle. He fired. The bullet struck the sentinel's chest, but its energy shields absorbed the shots like raindrops on metal. It didn't even slow down. Xyra, her eyes blazing, pulled a small holographic knife from her belt and activated it. The blade pulsed with blue energy, vibrating at a frequency sharp enough to slice through steel. Daniel saw what she was about to do. Wait, but she was already moving. Xyra lunged forward, dodging the sentinel's swinging claw by inches. She spun, twisting midair, and sliced her blade across its exposed joint. The sentinel screeched as its front limb crashed to the ground, severed cleanly. It staggered, its red eyes flickering. For the first time, it looked off balance. Daniel didn't waste the opportunity. He holstered his rifle and pulled out a plasma charge from his belt. With a flick of his wrist, he armed the explosive and hurled it directly at the sentinel's exposed chest. The charge lashed onto its metallic plating. "Get down," Daniel shouted. He tackled Xyra just as the explosion detonated. Boom! The blast rocked the tunnel, ripping the sentinel apart in a burst of fire and smoke. Its remains collapsed in a heap of smoldering wreckage. Silence followed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Daniel finally exhaled, his heart hammering. That, he muttered, was too close. Trust in the dark. Xyra sat up slowly, breathing heavily. She wiped dust from her face and turned to Daniel. "You saved me." Again, she said, her golden eyes studying him. Daniel smirked, dusting off his armor. "Yeah, well, you saved me first." Guess we're even. Xyra didn't respond immediately. Instead, something changed in her expression. For the first time, the cold, distant mask she always wore cracked just slightly. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "I'm the enemy." Daniel met her gaze. He could have given a dozen different answers. Duty, honor, strategy. But instead, he simply said, "I don't think you are." Something flickered in Xyra's eyes. She looked away, as if trying to process his words. Daniel stood, offering her his hand. "Come on. We need to keep moving." After a brief hesitation, she took it. The tension that had been there between them before, the silent, unspoken wall of distrust, was beginning to fade. For the first time, Daniel realized they weren't just allies of necessity anymore. They were in this together. Escape to the surface. Navigating through the ancient tunnels, they finally found a way up. A collapsed wall led to an underground railway station, abandoned long before the war. Daniel climbed up first, then pulled Xyra after him. When they reached the top, the night sky stretched wide before them. They had made it. They were free. But their victory was short-lived. Because in the distance, beyond the ruined city, a fleet of enemy warships was descending from the sky. Xyra's expression darkened. "They know I'm alive. And now, they know you're with me." Daniel tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let them come." Xyra turned to him, surprised. "You don't have to do this. If you leave now, you might still survive." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I made my choice." He looked at the warships approaching, then back at her. "Now let's finish what we started." Xyra's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, she smiled. Betrayal in the stars. The night sky above the ruined city was no longer empty. From the horizon, an armada of Phyrexian warships cut through the atmosphere, their metallic hulls reflecting the eerie glow of the burning skyline. The sight of them sent a wave of dread through Daniel. Beside him, Xyra stood frozen, her golden eyes locked on the fleet. Her expression was unreadable, but her fists clenched at her sides. "They found us faster than I expected," she murmured. Daniel exhaled sharply, gripping his rifle. "What are we dealing with?" Xyra's voice was low. "My brother's personal fleet, the Black Talon." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had heard stories of Princess Xyra, the ruthless commander of the Zarythian Empire's war machine. If he was here, this wasn't just a capture mission. It was an execution. "He won't just kill you, will he?" Daniel asked. Xyra shook her head, her jaw tightening. "No, he'll make an example of me." Daniel had seen this before. Dictators, warlords, tyrants. They didn't just erase their enemies. They made sure everyone washed. But Xyra wasn't just anyone. She was royalty, a symbol of rebellion. And Sailor wanted her dead. "Then we don't let him take you," Daniel said, his voice firm. Xyra turned to him, something unreadable flickering in her gaze. "You don't understand, Daniel. This isn't your war. You can still walk away." Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. "Too late for that." Xyra searched his face, as if trying to find hesitation, doubt, regret. But there was none. Daniel Carter had made his choice. The impossible escape plan. Daniel pulled out a holographic map from his wrist device, scanning the terrain. They needed a ship. Fast. There. Xyra pointed to an old docking station. "That's where my father's personal ship was kept before the war. If it's still there, we might have a chance." Daniel glanced at her. "And you're just telling me this now?" Xyra smirked. "You never asked." He rolled his eyes. "All right, princess. Let's move." Breaking into the docking station. The docking station was a massive, abandoned structure, half buried under rubble. It had once been a hub of Phyrexian engineering, but now it stood as a relic of a past war. Daniel and Xyra moved quickly, weaving through the shadows, avoiding patrol drones scanning the area. Inside, dust coated the sleek black floors, and broken lights flickered weakly. But at the far end of the chamber, a ship remained intact. It was a Virexian stealth cruiser, sleek, dark, built for high-speed travel. Daniel whistled low. Now that's a ship. Xyra's lips curved into a small smile. The Eclipse. It belonged to my mother before she died. Daniel looked at her. And it still flies. Xyra walked up to the ship, placing her hand on its panel. The moment her fingers made contact, a deep hum vibrated through the air. The ship recognized her. Only for me, she said softly. The engines flickered to life. Then let's get the hell out of here, Daniel said. But before they could board, a voice echoed through the chamber. Going somewhere, dear sister. Prince Xyra's arrival. Xyra froze. Daniel turned slowly, raising his weapon. Standing at the entrance of the docking station, flanked by Virexian elite guards, was Prince Xyra. Tall, clad in obsidian black armor, and with the same golden eyes as Xyra, but colder, crueler. A smirk played on his lips as he stepped forward. You know, I expected better of you, Xyra, he said. Running away with a human. That's low, even for a traitor. Xyra's fists clenched. You murdered our father. Xyra's smirk didn't fade. He was weak, just like you. Daniel kept his gun steady, his soldier's instincts taking over. He could tell Xyra wasn't here for negotiations. Let her go, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. She's not your enemy. Xyra laughed. Oh, you really don't understand, do you? His golden eyes flickered toward Daniel, full of mockery. You think she's innocent. Xyra stepped closer, his voice silk and steel. Has she told you the truth, human? Daniel narrowed his eyes. What truth? Xyra stiffened. Xyra smirked. She started this war. Daniel felt the words hit like a bullet. He glanced at Xyra. What is he talking about? Xyra's lips parted, but she didn't answer. Xyra stepped forward. Did she tell you about the council? About the first attack? About how she... Enough. Xyra's voice cracked like thunder. For the first time, Daniel saw something in her eyes. Guilt. Is it true? Daniel asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Xyra swallowed. I tried to stop it. But you failed, didn't you? Xyra finished for her. His smirk widened. Because of you, Villians died. Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. He had trusted her. He had risked everything for her. And now, he wasn't sure what to believe. Xyra turned to him, her expression raw, unguarded. Daniel, I didn't want this war. But I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. A gunshot cut her off. Daniel instinctively tackled Xyra to the ground as Xyra's soldiers opened fire. The docking station erupted into chaos. Blaster bolts ripped through the air. Xyra's betrayal. Xyra's cruelty. The truth was a blur. None of it mattered now. Because right now they had one chance to escape, and if they failed, they were both dead. The battle for freedom. The docking station exploded into chaos. Blaster fire rained down as Daniel and Xyra dove behind a pile of broken machinery. Sparks flew as plasma bolts sizzled against metal, the air thick with heat and smoke. We're pinned down, Daniel shouted, gripping his rifle. Xyra's golden eyes burned with fury as she stole a glance at her brother. Xyra stood calmly amidst the chaos, watching with cold amusement. His soldiers advanced in perfect formation, tight, disciplined, merciless. Daniel turned to Xyra. That ship still works, right? She nodded, her breathing sharp. Yes, but we have to get past them first. Daniel checked his ammo. Then we better make some space. Without waiting for a response, he popped out of cover and fired. A soldier went down, then another, but the rest kept coming. Xyra activated her energy blade, the blue light humming as she dashed forward, weaving through the gunfire with inhuman agility. Daniel followed, covering her, his shots precise, controlled. Years of battlefield experience had trained him well, but even he knew this was a fight they couldn't win. Then Salar's voice boomed across the chamber. Enough. A shockwave rippled through the air, sending Xyra crashing to the ground. Daniel's body locked up, his muscles tensed against his will, his breath caught in his throat. A gravity field. Xyra had triggered a battlefield suppressor, a device designed to immobilize enemies without killing them. Daniel struggled to move, his fingers barely twitching. Xyra approached slowly, his boots clicking against the metal floor. He knelt beside Xyra, gripping her by the throat. "This is over, little sister," he whispered, his tone mocking, triumphant. Xyra clawed at his wrist, gasping for air. Daniel forced his body to move, inch by inch, his vision blurred, muscles screaming, but he refused to stop. And then, he saw it. The detonator. Still clipped to his belt, his fingers inched toward it. Xyra sneered, tightening his grip on Xyra's throat. "You always thought you were special," he hissed. "But in the end, you're nothing but a failure." Xyra's vision dimmed. Her limbs went weak. She heard Daniel's voice, distant, struggling. "Not today, you bastard." Then, a deafening explosion. The fight turns. The gravity field collapsed. Daniel lunged forward, tackling Xyra off Xyra. The prince stumbled back, surprised. His golden eyes flashed with rage. Xyra gasped for breath, her vision clearing just in time to see Daniel and Salar collide. Fists flew. Brutal. Fast. Relentless. Daniel ducked a strike, drove his knee into Xyra's ribs, then slammed his elbow into his jaw. But Salar wasn't just a royal. He was a trained killer. A sudden blast of energy from Salar's gauntlet sent Daniel sprawling across the floor. Xyra wiped the blood from his lip, his smile cruel. "You fight well, human, but you're out of your depth." Daniel coughed, blood in his mouth. He grinned. "Yeah, so are you." Xyra frowned, just as Xyra's blade ignited behind him. Before he could react, she drove it deep into his side. Xyra let out a sharp, pained breath. He turned to Xyra, eyes wide in disbelief. "You wouldn't." Xyra's expression was cold. "You were wrong, brother. I'm not weak." With one final twist of the blade, she let him fall. The last escape. Salar's soldiers hesitated. Their commander had fallen. Daniel didn't give them a chance to recover. "Move. Now." He grabbed Xyra's hand, pulling her toward the eclipse. The ship's ramp lowered as they ran. Xyra sprinted inside, rushing to the cockpit. Daniel followed, slamming the hatch shut behind them. Outside, the Phyrexian guards finally recovered, opening fire. Xyra's fingers flew across the controls. The eclipse roared to life. Engines ignited. Metal groaned. The docking station shook as the ship lifted off, blasting through the chamber's ruined ceiling. And then, they were in the sky. Daniel collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, chest heaving. "Tell me we're not dead." Xyra smirked. "Not yet." Then, a warning alarm. Daniel tensed. "What now?" Xyra's smirk faded. She pointed at the holographic display. Behind them, an entire fleet of warships was giving chase. A new future. The eclipse hurtled through the sky, its engines roaring as it blasted toward the planet's upper atmosphere. Behind them, Salar's war fleet gave chase. Inside the cockpit, Daniel gripped the seat's edge as Xyra's fingers danced over the controls. The ship shuddered as enemy cannons locked onto them. "Brace yourself," Xyra shouted. A barrage of plasma bolts streaked past them, one shot grazing the ship's wing. The cockpit alarms shrieked as the ship lurched violently to the side. Daniel's jaw clenched. "We're not gonna make it like this. We need a way out. Now." Xyra's eyes flickered with determination. "There's one way." Daniel didn't like the sound of that. "I hate it already." Xyra punched in coordinates, her expression tight. There's a jump point just outside the stratosphere. If we reach it, we can activate the warp drive. Daniel glanced at the scanners. The fleet was closing in. And if we don't? Xyra didn't answer. She didn't have to. They'd be vaporized. The last stand. As the Eclipse streaked toward the jump point, the lead warship sent out a transmission. A familiar, cold voice filled the cockpit. "You can't outrun us, sister." Daniel's stomach tightened. His hand instinctively went to his rifle. Xyra's hands froze over the controls. Her golden eyes darkened as she recognized the voice. "Xalar." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I thought we killed that bastard." Xyra swallowed. "I should have known he had a failsafe." The transmission continued. "You think you can run? That you can rewrite your fate? You're a fool, Xyra. You always have been." Daniel leaned forward, glaring at the screen. "I don't know how you survived, but if you want her, you'll have to go through me." A beat of silence. Then Xalar's cold, humorless laugh. "Oh, I intend to." Then the entire fleet opened fire. The final gambit. Xyra jerked the Eclipse into a dizzying barrel roll, narrowly dodging the first barrage. Daniel grabbed the ship's manual targeting system, covering fire. He pressed the trigger, unleashing a hailstorm of laser blasts. The shots tore through 2 enemy interceptors, sending them spiraling into the void. But it wasn't enough. The warships were too many, too fast. Daniel gritted his teeth. They needed a miracle. Then, Xyra's fingers hovered over a single, unmarked button. She took a deep breath. "Daniel, you trust me." Daniel's stomach flipped. "What are you about to do?" Xyra didn't answer. She just pressed the button. And then, the Eclipse shut off completely. The ship went dark. Daniel's heart stopped. "What the hell did you just do?" Xyra's voice was calm. "Trust me." Daniel didn't get the chance to argue. Because in that instant, the Eclipse vanished from enemy sensors. The ship had cloaked. Xalar's fleet screamed past them, their weapons firing at empty space. Xyra watched the enemy ships frantically scanning the void. Her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "They won't find us." This ship was designed for stealth, even against Phyrexian technology. Daniel let out a slow breath. "You could have warned me before cutting the engines." Xyra grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" Daniel shook his head, but a small smirk tugged at his lips. They weren't dead, but they weren't safe yet. The jump to freedom. Xyra reactivated the engines silently, setting their course. "I'm taking us out of here. Once we jump, they won't be able to track us." Daniel leaned back in his seat, exhaling. "Where are we headed?" Xyra hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "I don't know," she admitted. Daniel studied her. The fierce, battle-hardened princess who had survived betrayal, war, and exile suddenly looked lost. Because for the first time in her life, she was free. No war, no empire, no throne. Just possibility. Daniel reached over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we figure it out. Together." Xyra looked at him, her golden eyes softening. Then, with a final push of a button, the warp drive activated. The stars stretched into infinity. The Eclipse vanished into the unknown. And the war, at least for them, was over. For now. Epilogue. A new dawn. Somewhere, in the vastness of the galaxy, a single message pinged across encrypted channels. A shadowy figure leaned back in their chair, reading the transmission. Their lips curled into a smile. "So, the princess is still alive." The screen flickered, revealing a set of coordinates. The figure stood up, stepping into the light. Their eyes gleamed. "Time to find her."